For Australians, Fiji is an incredibly popular holiday destination. But what tourists don't see is the signs of repression after 5 years of a military dictatorship. The interim Prime Minister, Commodore Frank Bainimarama, says he's fast-tracking consultations for a new constitution. He's lifted emergency rule, but critics of the regime say there's still an air of intimidation. The ABC's Philippa McDonnell has been on the ground in Fiji for Lateline.
Holidaymakers, it's paradise in the Pacific. Resort accommodation for every budget, and kids and honeymooners alike are welcome. What's your message to the hundreds of thousands of Australians who come here on holiday and consider Fiji a paradise?
Yeah, Fiji is a beautiful place to visit. But we, the people in Fiji, have a problem that exists that needs to be resolved.
On the surface, Fiji doesn't look any different to how it did before the military coup in 2006. And while almost 40% of the people continue to live below the poverty line, some of the poor have benefited from Frank Bainimarama's reforms. But Dan Ure, the head of Fiji's peak union body, says for those who speak out against the regime, punishment is swift.
Well, I landed into Nandi Airport on the Saturday morning. There was a police officer waiting for me, telling me that they wanted to see me at the police station in the airport. So I went into, and I asked what was I'd taken in for. The only reply I got was, the orders came from the top. Our job is to come and arrest you.
How many days were you held by the police, and at what stage were you given any legal representation or charged?
10 days, no legal representation. Just, can you check the dates for my next court appearance?
The 52-year-old is a former Fijian Labor Party MP and critic of some of the interim government's many decrees.
With the decrees that were introduced, they are trying to basically kill the union movement in Fiji. For a decree that they put down, some organized union, have basically been removed from its roles of looking after the interests of workers, particularly with the Air Pacific and other statutory bodies that we have in this country.
The interim government says businesses critical to Fiji's economy need to be protected. It's accused the country's union movement of being fat cats.
If you look at the history of trade unionism in this country, most of these people who are going out to Australia and New Zealand talking about trade unionism, they in fact sit in very comfortable positions. Most of the trade unions have only been strong in state-owned enterprises. They've been very strong in government-owned enterprises, or in fact the civil service. But where a lot of the exploitation takes place, for example, it was highlighted some years back in the retail sector, previously in some of the mining operations, in other areas where you have low-paid workers, there's an absence, there's a deafening absence of trade unionism.
Dan Ure's bail conditions include reporting to Lautoka Police Station every night.
What kind of jail term could you face?
Life imprisonment, because the charge comes under the commitment of treason.
When Commodore Bainimarama lifted Fiji's public emergency regulations in January, it came with a warning.
We must all remember that public order, protecting the vulnerable and safeguarding the economy will always be paramount.
At the same time, a public order amendment decree was introduced, meaning people could be held for up to 16 days without charge.
After that, they have to appear in the court. Now, Fiji is not alone in this respect. There are many countries that do that. In fact, in USA, it's an indefinite period. Should the Attorney General and the President of USA decide to hold a person, there's in fact no prescribed limitation to that. Many other countries do that.
Amen.
And even the churches have to apply for permits to hold meetings other than services.
Horses for courses, you have to realise the situation in Fiji. And if you see the actual focus of the amendment decree is to do with things like ethnic, religious, and racial vilification, which Fiji has been plagued with.
No, go to the next page. Pro-democracy activists like Virasila Bondromo from the women's rights movement are calling for the decrees to be revoked.
We need to tell the state that you've said that we're going to have elections in 2014. We want to see that process happen as well. However, we would like to see that process to be a legitimate process, and for us that means a process that is supported by the people, that's driven by the people, and for that process to be genuine, there needs to be the lifting of or the repealing of certain laws which are limiting people's ability to be able to express themselves openly and without fear.
At the same time Fiji's emergency rule was being lifted, former MP Mary Samasoni was arrested and held in a cell for 5 days.
I didn't expect it. I was coming off the plane and I was approached by the police, and the lady superintendent, the lady inspector, Lorraine, she just said that very quietly, we are arresting you and you will have to come with us. It came as a shock, but I contained myself.
Why was she held for 5 days? What kind of a message does it send when a 73-year-old woman, a former MP, is held without charge?
I understand in Australia you've had people who are 75 years old who've been charged with pedophile. Age is not of significance if a person is allegedly committed an offence. Let's not get emotional about this. The point is that if a person has committed or alleged to have committed an offence under the particular law, they will be charged according to that law.
The 73-year-old businesswoman is charged with inciting political violence. There are 20 Fijians currently charged with treason-related offences, and if they're convicted, they face hefty prison terms. Critics of the interim government say some of those cases have been brought to make it impossible for people with strong or opposing views to run for Parliament in 2014. In the meantime, Frank Bainimarama and his senior colleagues haven't ruled out standing in the elections. Paradise is a long way from being politically regained. Philippa McDonald, Lateline.